Mr Deputy Speaker, Queenslanders expect their governments to work hard. Queenslanders expect governments to have ideas to keep moving the state forward. And Queenslanders expect their government to have a plan. Well, Mr Speaker, those in the Palaszczuk government have none of that. Instead, Queenslanders have a government that has simply no plan. They have no plan to protect Queensland children, which is why I have proposed these tough new child killer laws. Queenslanders have a government that is so lazy they cancelled the December sitting of Parliament because they simply don't have the will to come to work. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, I ask everyone sitting in this chamber, what has Labor achieved this year? Sadly, not much. We already know that there is a do-nothing Premier leading a do-nothing government, but now we are starting to see the cost of a government that simply does nothing. We know the trains don't run on time when they run at all, 470 less services a week with no end in sight of the rail fail. We have a health system in crisis, ambulance ramping is back, emergency department wait times have blown out, elective surgery wait times simply unacceptable. The AMA report card shows bullying is rampant in our hospitals, with almost half of the junior doctors at the RBWH experiencing bullying or harassment. More than 1 in 3 doctors reported being bullied at the PA hospital, and more than 50% of junior doctors at Lady Salento Children's Hospital advised not to claim overtime. But what does this health minister care about? One thing and one thing only, and that is changing the name of Lady Salento Children's Hospital. It is a disgrace, Mr Deputy Speaker, but the list doesn't stop there. Sadly, Mr Deputy Speaker, the failures continue. Our education standards are going backwards. Queensland kids in the last 12 months have gone backwards in terms of Year 3, 5, 7 and 9 standards. We've got drug and violent crime is increasing across the state. Crime in Queensland has hit crisis levels, and we have seen police cuts throughout the There isn't a night on the TV news that we don't see a Queenslander who affected by crime. These are innocent Queenslanders who are bearing the brunt of Queensland's crime crisis. But what is the Police Minister's response to all of this? Nothing to see here, folks. Well, it is a joke, Mr Deputy Speaker. The Police Minister spends too much time denying problems are there in front of him instead of fixing the problem. Queenslanders need real action on crime. Mr Deputy Speaker, our debt is ever increasing. Labor's debt is costing Queenslanders $3.5 billion a year, $9.5 million a day, $400,000 an hour and almost $7,000 a minute just in interest charges. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, Queensland has the worst unemployment in the nation. It has now held this wooden spoon for the last 2 consecutive months. September's unemployment rate was 6.1% trend and 6% seasonally adjusted. Mr Deputy Speaker, I could go on, but sadly there are just too many failures of this Labor government for the time that is allowed. Queenslanders want better than this, and they deserve better than this government. There are serious problems that need to be solved, but the Premier is simply afraid to make the difficult decisions. When there is a problem, the Premier simply disappears from sight and from scrutiny. That is not governing, and it is certainly not what Queenslanders want in a Premier. Those opposite under the Palaszczuk government have no plan, they have no energy, and they certainly have no ideas. Mr Deputy Speaker, there is plenty of work to do, but the Premier's priorities are simply all wrong. Queensland families and businesses are paying the higher taxes and increased living costs. Much-needed infrastructure across Queensland is not being built. And instead of leading the way in job creation and job security, we are falling behind the other states. Labor's priorities are all wrong. Labor spends millions renaming a hospital when the health system is in crisis. Labor gives domestic violence offenders extra taxpayer-funded leave but doesn't close the loopholes in the blue card system until pressured by the LNP. Labor introduces 5 new taxes when Queensland has the highest unemployment in the nation and staggering low business confidence. Labor's cuts to police when crime is out of control. Labor wants to teach our kids about unions while education standards are slipping. Labor slugs you more for your rego and electricity but doesn't fix our roads and lower your power bills. Labor does favours for union mates, but rail fail continues. Labor is more concerned about criminals' rights than yours. Labor has ordered 250 reviews but then covers up their findings. Labor spends millions of dollars on overseas travel but cuts maternity services in the bush. It is a complete disgrace when those opposite are focused on those matters rather than what really counts for Queenslanders. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, when I was elected opposition leader, I said I would be an opposition leader with a plan. I said I would be an opposition leader that offered solutions to this government. And it is clear they like these solutions because we've seen those opposite now adopt 7 of the LNP's plans. That is 7 of our policies. We've seen those opposite get on board with free swimming lessons for our kids, an LNP policy, real fuel time monitoring, an LNP policy yet to be enacted, announced by those opposite, but still not doing anything about it. That was an LNP policy. GPS tracking on dangerous sex offenders, LNP policy. Upgrading the M1, an LNP policy. Duplicating Sunshine Coast Rail, another LNP policy. Third government generator to lower electricity prices, an LNP policy, and also mandating government investment in renewables, another LNP policy. Mr Deputy Speaker, it is clear this government has no fresh ideas of their own. It is clear that this government is bone lazy. Mr Speaker, it is clear that the Palaszczuk government have no plan, no interest and no energy in Queensland. It is only the LNP that has a clear plan for Queensland.